Welcome to Rainbow Spotlight, where we share the powerful stories of LGBTQ+ athletes breaking barriers in sports. Today, we dive into the journey of Maxime Bouchard, a Canadian Olympian who faced not just physical challenges, but an even greater internal battle. A devastating accident nearly ended his career, but his true turning point came when he found the courage to come out. Once he embraced his identity, his performance soared, leading him to the 2016 Rio Olympics. Beyond the medals, he found something even greater: love, happiness, and the freedom to be himself. 1. Introduction: a journey of survival and self-discovery. Maxime Bouchard's journey is not just a story of athletic achievement. It is a testament to human resilience, self-acceptance, and the power of authenticity. As an elite diver representing Canada, Bouchard reached the pinnacle of his sport by competing at the 2016 Rio Olympics. But his road to that moment was anything but easy. At just 19 years old, he suffered a horrific accident that nearly ended his career and his life. Against all odds, he fought his way back to elite competition. But even as he reclaimed his physical strength, he carried an internal battle that weighed just as heavily on him. For years, Bouchard lived with a secret that impacted his confidence, his performance, and his mental health. He was gay, and he was afraid to come out. Growing up in a sport where homophobia existed in subtle and overt ways, he learned to suppress his identity. But when he finally made the decision to come out, everything changed. His story is proof that being true to oneself can unlock potential in ways unimaginable. The moment he embraced his identity, his diving reached new heights, ultimately securing him a place in the biggest sporting event in the world. Bouchard's journey is shaped by 3 defining moments: a near-fatal accident, the decision to come out, and the realization that being openly gay was not a distraction. It was his key to success. His story is not just about sports. It is about survival, transformation, and the courage to break free from fear. 2. The accident that nearly took his life. In 2010, at just 19 years old, Maxime Bouchard's career nearly ended in a single moment. While performing at a diving exhibition in the Philippines, the wooden platform beneath him collapsed. Instead of landing in the pool, he plummeted onto concrete, suffering severe head trauma, fractures, and deep lacerations. Doctors rushed to stabilize him, inserting a metal plate into his left arm, but the prognosis was grim. He might never dive again. For 6 months, he couldn't even lift his hand. Yet, against all odds, Bouchard refused to accept defeat. Through 18 months of grueling rehabilitation, he rebuilt his strength, proving everyone wrong. By 2012, he placed 4th at Canada's Olympic trials, and by 2013, he was national champion. His comeback was extraordinary, but the battle he fought inside, one of fear, identity, and acceptance, was just beginning. 3. The hidden struggles of a closeted athlete. Despite his success, Bouchard was carrying a secret that weighed heavily on him. He was gay, and he was afraid to come out. From a young age, he had learned that being different in the world of sports could be dangerous. Even though diving was not as aggressively homophobic as some other sports, there were still barriers, prejudices, and unspoken rules that made him feel like he had to keep his identity hidden. One of the biggest obstacles came from certain coaches in the Canadian diving setup. While not all of them were openly hostile, some used homophobic language and slurs, making it clear that being gay was not something to be embraced. It would be how they were behaving or little comments they would throw in, Bouchard recalls. They would use words like "fef," "at." Hearing these words from figures of authority reinforced his belief that coming out could jeopardize his career. He feared being treated differently, losing opportunities, or being seen as a distraction rather than an athlete. So he stayed silent. Even outside of diving, Bouchard struggled with his identity. In high school, classmates had teased him, assuming he was gay simply because he was a diver. The idea of proving them right terrified him. To make things even more complicated, his older brother was also gay. While his family had been supportive, this created an unexpected pressure in his mind. He felt like coming out would make it seem like his identity was tied to his brothers rather than something personal. "I've always been someone that keeps everything to myself," he admits. "Because of that, I wasn't comfortable to be openly gay around them. It wasn't the greatest ambiance." Even though he had overcome a near-fatal accident, he still felt trapped, not by his body, but by his own fear. But something inside him started to change. By 2016, he had regained his form and was pushing for an Olympic spot. He had proven to himself that he could recover physically, but he knew that if he wanted to reach the next level, he needed to free himself mentally. That meant one thing: he needed to come out. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to stop letting fear control him. And in January 2016, at a diving event in Germany, he finally did. Coming out. The moment that changed everything. Maxime Bouchard stood on the edge of the diving board, high above the water, staring down at the pool beneath him. The feeling was familiar. He had been here countless times before. The sharp scent of chlorine, the pressure of competition, the knowledge that one mistake could cost him everything. But on this particular day in January 2016, in a cold, dimly lit diving arena in Germany, there was something else. A storm was raging inside him. He had spent his entire career chasing perfection. Perfect dives, perfect form, perfect scores. But no matter how many times he executed a flawless dive, something always felt off. It wasn't the mechanics of the sport. It was something deeper, more suffocating. A voice in his head that never stopped whispering, "You're hiding. You're lying. You're afraid." For years, he had compartmentalized his life. In the pool, he was Maxime Bouchard, the elite diver, the future Olympian. Out of the pool, he was someone else, a person living behind a mask, too afraid to admit the truth even to himself. It had always seemed easier to suppress it. Ignore the thoughts. Focus on the training. Push forward, one dive at a time. But something had changed. The closer he got to achieving his Olympic dream, the heavier the weight became. The silence wasn't just a burden anymore. It was a cage. The pressure inside him had reached a breaking point, and he could feel himself cracking. That week in Germany, the tension inside him became unbearable. He had been traveling, competing, surrounded by teammates, yet he had never felt lonelier. The isolation of his own thoughts had begun to feel like an inescapable prison. At night, in his hotel room, he stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. What if they reject me? What if I lose everything? What if this changes how they see me forever? The fear was paralyzing. He had already survived a near-death experience, already fought his way back to the top. But this terrified him. On the morning of the competition, after another sleepless night, he couldn't hold it in anymore. He couldn't breathe under the weight of his own thoughts. His hands were trembling as he walked toward his teammates, his heart hammering in his chest. The words felt like they would choke him, but he forced them out. "I need to tell you something." For a second, no one spoke. His pulse was roaring in his ears, his stomach clenched. This was it. The moment that could change everything. Then, one of his teammates smiled and said, "Max, we love you. This doesn't change a thing." The breath he had been holding for years finally escaped. Relief flooded through him so fast it left him dizzy. He had been so afraid, so convinced that this would ruin everything. But instead, it set him free. His teammates embraced him, reassured him, made him realize something he had never let himself believe before. He had never been alone. He had just convinced himself that he was. And in that moment, standing among the people he had feared would turn away from him, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt whole. 5. How coming out led to the Olympics. Something inside him had shifted. Maxime Bouchard walked onto the diving board at the 2016 Diving World Cup in Rio, but this time, something was different. The tension that had always followed him, the anxiety, the second-guessing, the constant battle to hide a part of himself, was gone. For the first time in his career, he felt light. It wasn't that the pressure of the competition had disappeared. The stakes were still high. Olympic quota places were on the line, and this was his chance to prove that he belonged on the world's biggest stage. But instead of standing on the edge of the board with the familiar tightness in his chest, he felt at peace. The water beneath him was no longer something he had to conquer. It was his home. He took a deep breath. He smiled. And then he dived. What happened over the next few hours was something he had only dreamed of. Round after round, his scores climbed higher and higher. He was landing his dives cleaner, smoother, more effortlessly than ever before. By the time the final scores were posted, he had finished in 7th place with a personal best score of 452.50. It was the highest finish by a Canadian male diver in over a decade. It also secured Canada an extra quota spot for the 2016 Rio Olympics, a spot that would go to him. When he saw his name on the Olympic roster, he felt the full weight of his journey hit him all at once. He had almost lost everything 6 years ago in a near-fatal accident. He had spent years suffocating under the fear of his own identity. But now he was going to the Olympics, and he had made it there not in spite of being gay, but because he had finally embraced who he was. One of his coaches had once told him that coming out would be a distraction, that he should have waited until after the Olympics. But they had been wrong. Coming out hadn't distracted him. It had freed him. His biggest obstacle had never been his diving technique. It had never been his injuries. His biggest obstacle had been himself. And now, that obstacle was gone. Maxime Bouchard wasn't just competing at the Olympics as a Canadian athlete, he was competing as the truest version of himself. And for the first time in his life, he knew that was more than enough. 6. A love that changed everything. It happened when he least expected it. Maxime Bouchard had spent most of his life focused on one thing: diving. His world had been measured in meters, degrees of difficulty, and perfect entries into the water. He had never let himself think much about love, not in any real way. There had always been something more pressing, a goal to reach, a fear to overcome. But then, in a city thousands of miles from home, everything changed. It was during a competition in Dubai. The air was thick with heat, the energy electric. He had just come off another strong performance, his confidence soaring after finally freeing himself from the weight of secrecy. He wasn't looking for anything that night. And yet, when he met Babak Golkar, a fashion designer with a mischievous smile and eyes that saw right through him, the world seemed to shift beneath his feet. It was instant. A conversation that started as small talk stretched into hours. The way Babak listened, the way he laughed, it was like discovering a language he had always known but never spoken. For the first time, Maxime felt something he hadn't realized he was missing. He had spent so long searching for validation in his sport, but with Babak, he didn't have to prove anything. He was enough, just as he was. Long distance was never easy. Between Canada, LA, and Dubai, their lives existed across time zones and airport terminals, but somehow it never felt like a struggle. Every phone call, every stolen weekend together, every moment they could carve out from their demanding schedules only made them stronger. Maxime had always been used to chasing perfection, but love, real love, was imperfect, unpredictable, and breathtakingly beautiful. After 8 years together, they had built something extraordinary. Their lives were no longer measured by scores or rankings, but by lazy mornings wrapped in each other's arms, laughter echoing through shared spaces, the quiet certainty that no matter where they were in the world, they belonged to each other. They had built a home together, not just in a physical sense, but in the way they understood each other, in the way their love had weathered distance, challenges, and change. Maxime had once thought that standing on the Olympic stage was the greatest feeling in the world. But now he knew better. Love, real and unshakable, was the greatest victory of all. Looking back, Maxime Bouchard's story is not just one of resilience, but of transformation. He survived a fall that should have ended his career, overcame years of silence and fear, and learned that his greatest strength was not in his physical ability, but in his ability to embrace who he truly was. He had reached the Olympics, yes, but more importantly, he had reached a place of peace, love, and absolute happiness. Now, he looks toward the future with the quiet confidence of a man who has conquered every battle within and beyond himself. He hopes his story helps others find the courage to live freely, to love deeply, and to know that the greatest success in life is simply being yourself. If this story has moved you, if you believe in the power of authenticity and resilience, consider sending a super thanks to support more stories like this. Every small gesture helps keep these voices alive, reminding us all that courage and love can change everything.